The Malta Caves Disappearances, a mysterious story of a group of children tragically going missing in the caves below Malta, and dark figures being spotted beckoning a woman further into the same caves. I heard this story and it caught my attention, but I realized that most of what I heard was not particularly right because it had some of the wrong images involved with it, and I decided to look into it more myself, and so you're stuck with me for now because there's no other good information about this on the internet that I could find. All that's out there generally comes from the same two sources, one being the writings of C. Lois Jessup, and then the other being a National Geographic magazine from 1940. Nobody's really given this story much attention yet, so here I am, I guess. That's nice. And I appreciate you very much for stopping by, so I'll get started now. And apologies, I am using a script / outline. I'm new to this, so I'm gonna have to look down here occasionally. Okay, so Malta has a bunch of ancient tunnels below it, and there's a lot of caverns, some natural, and then there's a lot of them that are man-made, and there's a burial place there known as the Hypogeum of Halseflieni. I might be pronouncing that wrong. I don't speak Maltese, if that's even Maltese, and but I'm just going to be referring it to the Hypogeum, as that's what most people do. Hypogeum is Latin for underground structure, so pretty simple. It was dug into by accident in 1902, and the people that dug into it realized what it was and tried to cover it up so they could finish the work that they were doing without having it exposed, but it was officially excavated a year later in 1903. It's an ancient religious site and also a burial place dating back to as early as potentially 4000 BC, and then it was likely used until maybe 2500 BC, so about 1500 years, which is a pretty long time. And the Hypogeum has 3 officially recognized levels, and I'll get to what I mean by officially recognized in a minute. Level 1 doesn't really have much interesting to say about it. It was likely just natural, and it was discovered, and then the people who discovered it dug further into it and expanded on it. And that's where the rooms like the stuff in Level 2 comes from, and that's most of the notable rooms, like there's one called the Holy of Holies, the Oracle, the Main Chamber, and those aren't particularly relevant to this, but they are interesting. The third level is where it starts to get interesting, because the third level consists of a bunch of man-made rooms and a lot of natural caverns that have been expanded out. The last chamber is full of a few small passages that are referred to as burial chambers, and the skeletal remains of over 7,000 people were found buried on this level. That's an estimate. They were all removed, and nobody really knows where they went after they came out, but the guy that was in charge of excavating them estimates that it was about 7,000 total. If I remember correctly, there are only 5 skulls left from this, so yeah, 7,000 people most likely were buried here. And each of these passages that were the burial chambers are so small that they are large enough for only one person to crawl through them. One at a time, that is. And that's where the rumors and the theories begin about this. One of these burial chambers supposedly does not end like the others, and it continues on into caverns below Malta. There's an entire network of caves and tunnels and structures below Malta, very much like the Hypogeum. The Hypogeum is just one of them, and it's very, very possible that the Hypogeum is connected to other tunnels under there, because supposedly you used to be able to walk from one side of Malta to the other completely underground, according to National Geographic. And the Malta caves have 2 pretty eerie stories attached to them, and they are possibly unrelated. Some might think that they're linked. And I'll start with the first one, which is mysterious beings beckoning in the caverns. And this is reported by a person named Lois Jessup. She lived in the 1950s, most likely. She is a real person, or at least most likely. She's thought to be real. She worked for the British government. In what's written, it says she worked for the British Embassy, but that's probably not true because she most likely lived during the 1950s, and the British Embassy to Malta did not exist at that point. So this all starts where Jessup and her friends, they are out and it's a really hot day, so they decide to take a tour of the Hypogeum, and they get a guide that's named Joe. And Joe gives them all 1 candle, and they all go down into the Hypogeum, and when they get to the last level, Joe suddenly decides, this is the end of the tour. We're going back. So, as written by Jessup, this is the end of the tour, Joe the guide said. We must turn now and retrace our steps. What's down there? I asked him, for on turning I noticed another opening off of one of the walls. Go there at your own risk, he replied, and you won't go far. I was all for more exploring and talked it over with my friends. 3 of them decided to go with me and 2 waited with the guide. I was wearing a long sash around my dress, and since I decided to lead the group, I asked the next one behind me to hold on to it. Holding our half-burnt candles, the four of us ducked into this passage, which was narrower and lower than the others. Groping and laughing our way along, I came out first onto a ledged pathway about 2 feet wide, with a sheer drop of about 50 feet or more on my right and a wall on my left. I took a step forward, close to the rock wall side. The person behind me, still holding onto my sash, had not yet emerged from the passage. Thinking it was quite a drop, perhaps, I should go no further without the guide, and I held up my candle. There across the cave, from an opening deep below me, emerged 20 persons of giant stature. In single file, they walked along a narrow ledge. Their height I judged to be about 20 or 25 feet, since their heads came about halfway up the wall. They walked very slowly, taking long strides. Then they all stopped and turned and raised their heads in my direction, all simultaneously raising their arms with their hands and beckoned me. The movement was something like snatching or feeling or something, because the palms of their hands were face down. Terror rooted me to the spot. "Go on, we're all getting stuck in the passage," my friend jerked at my sash. "What's the matter?" There's nothing to see," I stammered, taking another step forward. My candle was in my right hand. I put my left hand to the wall to steady me, and stopped again. My hand wasn't on cold rock, but on something soft and wet. As it moved, a strong gust of wind came from nowhere and blew out my candle. Now I was really scared in the darkness. "Go back," I yelled at the others. "Go back and guide me by my sash. My candle has gone out. I cannot see." In utter panic, I backed into the narrow little passageway and forced the others back too, until we had backed into the large room where Joe and my friends were waiting. What a relief that was. "Did you see anything?" asked one of them. "No," I quickly responded. "There was a draft in there and it blew my candle out." "Let's go," said Joe the guide. I looked up at him. Our eyes met. I knew that at one time he had seen what I had seen. There was an expression of caution in his eyes, adding to my reluctance to tell anyone, so I decided not to. Pretty odd. That's not your average cave exploring story as far as you can tell, and I will expand upon that a little bit later. Interestingly, I looked into this some more, and Malta has plenty of legends about giants, and so the story goes that the island was once ruled by the offspring of a giantess who rose from the Atlantic and came to the ground. Ancient figures of giants are extremely common to find in the artifacts on Malta. Similar ones to those encountered by Jessup have been seen all over Malta, and interestingly, in the hypogeum, there is a carved-out figure of a sleeping woman who is most likely a goddess. We don't really have any good information about that kind of stuff, and that was found during excavation at the hypogeum. Also, there's a man named Dr. Anton Misfud, and he claims that he has a friend who dug up a skeleton of a giant, 10-foot-long creature, and that he hid it away and didn't tell anyone, but there's no evidence to back these claims. There's no 10-foot skeleton, so But now I will tell you about the second story, which, according to Jessup, is related to her story. Whether it is or not, I'll get into that in a minute. And this one is about the disappearing school children. It's a pretty tragic story. A group of 30 school children or so and their teacher, that's the number I've been able to find. It might not be accurate at all. There's not much good information. They all went to the hypogeum for a study trip, supposedly. And all of the students were roped together, and the rope was tied to the entrance, and as soon as they entered, they were never seen again. The passage just happened to cave in behind them, and the official story says that the cave-in happened on the students. But there were plenty of excavations that happened after that looking for the bodies, and none of them were found, according to the story, where they looked for them. So where they were supposedly caved in on, there was nothing there. Search parties immediately got to work. No trace of the group was found, and tragically, after 3 weeks of looking, the search was given up entirely, and the children were left for dead. One weird detail is that the rope was split apart perfectly, the one they were all tied by, and the cut in the rope looked very intentional. It was done with a sharp object, which would not be a falling rock, especially in a cave-in. It was clean cut off. So then, this is where it starts to get really weird. Following the event, the screams of the children were heard around Malta, often by their mothers or family members or people who knew them, and it sounded like they were coming from the ground. And whenever the people heard this, they would get shovels, they would get tools, they would start digging up the ground to see if they could try to find them, but nobody ever found anything. And that's where, after 3 weeks, the search was given up, because there was no luck in finding anything. This ties into Jessup's stories about the mysterious figures in the dark tunnel because supposedly, according to her, this was the same tunnel that she had gone into with her friends with the dark figures clawing around at her. And this, of course, is the tunnel that supposedly goes deeper into the caverns from the third level of the hypogeum that supposedly exists, although there's no real evidence of it existing because not many people are allowed down there, so if it does exist, nobody's really able to see it. So Jessup reports that she learned about the missing children after she left the cave the next day, and this is what she says. She says, "I left my address with him and I asked him to have the school teacher guide get in touch with me, but I never heard any more about it, until one of my friends called me to read an item from the Valletta paper. I say, Lois, remember the tunnel you wanted to explore? It says here in the paper that a schoolmaster and 30 students went exploring, and apparently got as far as we did. They were roped together and the end of the rope was tied to the opening of the cave. As the last student turned the corner where your candle blew out, the rope was clean cut, and none of the party was found because the walls caved in." The shock of this information didn't change my determination not to say anything about my experience in the hypogeum. But several months later, my sister visited Malta and insisted on making a tour of the underground temple in Hal Saflieni. Reluctantly, I went along, retracing the same route, but there was a different guide this time. When we got down to the lowest level, to the room where I had taken off to explore the tunnel entrance, was boarded up. "Wasn't it here when the schoolmaster and 30 students got trapped?" I asked the guide. "Perhaps," he replied, with a non-committal shrug of his shoulders, and refused to say anything more. You can't get a thing out of the Maltese when they don't want to talk. "You're new here, aren't you?" I asked him. "Where's Joe, the guide who was here a couple of months ago?" "I don't know any Joe." He shook his head. "I alone have been showing people around this catacomb for years." "Who is this guide, and why did Joe disappear after we left Hal Saflieni the first time? And why is it impossible to get any facts on the disappearing school children's story? In the summer of 1960, Louise Becker, the treasurer for the NYSIB, which is the New York saucer something, they're saucers, yeah. She visited Malta during her European trip. She searched old newspaper files in the museum trying to get some facts to substantiate my story, but in vain. The Maltese are tight-lipped about the secrets of their island. And that's all that Jessup had to say about it. So you may be wondering, okay, is there any evidence about what happened with the children? When did this happen? It's a pretty odd story to have just passed down by mouth, right? Like, there's no official record of this anywhere in Malta, and you also can't find anyone who claims to have known, or anyone who met, or anyone who was even related to the children, nor anyone who knows somebody who was related to the children. And the best guess is that if this did actually happen, it happened shortly before World War II started, sometime in the 1930s. And during World War II, Malta was bombed quite heavily, and a lot of people took shelter in the caves there, and many family members of the kids who went missing could have been killed in the bombing or the cave collapses that happened during that time. And also, when the entire world is at war, children going missing in a cave is not quite as big of a story. I mean, it's tragic, 30 children missing, but there's bombing all over Malta, and that forced people to hide in the underground caverns and caves. This also does kind of line up with the estimate that Jessup would have been in Malta during the 1950s. That's the best that I could tell about her. It would have been not too long after the war, and still right around the time periods of the disappearance of the kids, 20 or so years, maybe even just like 15. Allegedly, the government blew up the tunnel entrances after the children went missing. So once they gave up the search, the government closed up a bunch of the tunnels so that it wouldn't happen anymore in the future. So yeah, that's the story with that. Now, if you want the lame explanations where I spoil all of the mystery, then continue. If you don't want lame explanations, then I wouldn't really recommend you stick around. The first one is pretty simple. It was a warning for children. A possible explanation for this was that the story was invented entirely by parents or somebody, or even by officials, to keep children from playing in the tunnels. That's pretty simple. There's a bit of evidence to back this, or at least there's a lack of evidence that sort of gives some reason to believe this is true. There is no evidence of the government ever closing down tunnels or shutting down tunnel entrances. after something like this happened. So that part of the story is already not true, and there's proof of that. There's no evidence of any tunnels being forced to collapse either. And the magazine does not really contain any sources for this incident. When it talks about the children going missing, it just writes about it. There's no evidence. There's no records in Malta. Nothing of that sort. So a lot of the information there is just drawn conclusions, and then some of its connections where there aren't really necessarily connections to be had. And if you look into it further, you don't really go anywhere because there's not much about it. One of the other theories here, which is pretty funny, this one is that it is based on a legend. And upon looking further into this, there's some people who speculate that this story is derived by the legend of a man who clears the city of its rat problem, and then the greedy city members refuse to pay him like they promised, so he plays his pipe again, and all of the children of the town follow him, and he takes them into a hole in the mountain, and they are never seen again. So yes, I did just tell you that the Maltese cave disappearances are inspired by the Pied Piper. That's a thought. There's a lot of people who think that, apparently. I personally have no idea. I just found that really funny, so I kind of decided to stick it in there. So, in conclusion, while Jessup was most likely a real person, and we do have the story written by her, I read from it earlier, and I'll link it. There was no real evidence that any of what she wrote about happened, and I don't doubt that she heard the story of the missing children while she was there. She probably heard it from somebody in the area or from somebody around. Although there's no real evidence to back it happening, she probably did know that it happened, though. Like I said earlier, no signs of any cave-ins on the location, no signs of cave or tunnel entrances being demolished by the government, no record of that either. And it seems that much more likely that the story that Jessup heard originated from a rumor to keep children out of the caverns, or a legend working its way into history. However, not everything in Malta at the time was really well documented. Like I've said, there is no documents of the children going missing or anything like this, but it also wasn't like the most well-established area at the time, and so records of this stuff just didn't really exist. It's entirely possible that a group of children did get lost in the caves at some point. The story might not be quite accurate what we hear now. A lot of it's probably embellished, such as the actually pretty awful detail about the family members hearing screaming and wailing of their children coming from the ground and trying to dig it up but finding nothing. And it's entirely possible there was a group of children that went missing and that they were given up for dead after 3 weeks of searching and no luck. But more than likely, the rumor that it happened in the same tunnel that Jessup was in is entirely just not true. It's just a rumor. There's no reports of it being in the same place. Also, this is something that's wrong with Jessup's account, is that the report of that does not say that it happened in the hypogeum. The report says that it happened in the tunnels under Malta, in the labyrinth of tunnels under Malta, something like that. And it does mention the hypogeum, but it doesn't mention it in relation to that part. So it doesn't seem very likely that they're actually related. And while there are many plausible explanations for the children disappearing, that's a believable story. The part about what Jessup experiences in the cave with the creatures, that's a little bit harder to take at face value, and there are really only two ways to take it as far as I see it, and that is that she either did not experience something, and if she didn't experience something, then if we assume that, we can assume that she just fabricated the entire story. She heard rumors of children going missing, and she decided that that's pretty mysterious, and I could write a story about this that would get the attention of a lot of people. It's pretty plausible to assume that she made it up. It certainly sounds kind of wild, but I don't want to immediately dismiss it entirely, because I don't like just saying, clearly didn't happen. I wasn't there, she was. Maybe. Although, one of the things that, a good reason to believe this, that she did make this up, I find it rather doubtful when she says that the floor is at least 50 feet below, that she can tell this and see a line of 20 people and discern that they're all 20 to 25 feet tall and watch them clawing like this when she has a candle. I have not tested if a candle helps you see 50 feet away in a dark cave, but it's a little bit odd. The other thing we can assume is that Jessup did experience something down there, and then there's kind of two ways you can go from here. If she did experience something down there, then we have a couple of things we can assume. She either did not see what she saw down there, but she did experience something, or she saw exactly what she said she saw. Either way, that's pretty interesting, because either way you're wondering, what did Jessup actually see down there? Or, if you're gonna take it the way that she's not lying, what happened down there? Because what? That would be a little new to me. 25-foot tall hairy giants in caves. Be fun though. It seems much more likely to me that she was mistaken, because what could you possibly mistake for, 20 to 25... No. It seems more likely she was not mistaken, because, what in the world are you going to mistake for a 20 to a 25-foot long single-file line of giant hairy creatures clawing at you? That's a little bit of a very specific thing, kind of hard to dismiss by just, yeah, Jessup and her bad eyes, she's always seeing things. And it's possible that her eyes were playing tricks on her, or that, her mind was playing tricks on her, she thought she saw something down there. But that's a little bit odd. And then the part about the blast of wind blowing out her candle, that's also odd too. I know wind and water can enter caves in very weird ways, but the idea of that kind of gust of wind, not very likely. It doesn't make much sense. So one of the things I did think at first was, okay, well, maybe the flickering of her candle produced something. No, that doesn't make any sense. The more I thought about it, yeah, your candle flickers and then there's suddenly 20 people across the room from you. Not very likely. And I don't like saying, clearly Jessup is just mistaken here, but I do find it a little bit hard to believe that what she saw is actually what she saw. But if we assume that it is that, then, what do we do with that information? It seems like the least likely option that that's what she saw, but it's also a rather strange story because, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, none of it. So I lean mostly towards it being fabricated, but I'm not exactly sure what Jessup had to gain by lying about this, because this was back in the 50s. This was back before, the internet or going viral and that kind of stuff was a thing. So I don't really know what she had to gain by making up a story like this that wasn't really going to be spread that far. There was already the National Geographic magazine, and this was just kind of one random lady who was not really gonna, this wasn't going to be anything big for her. So I don't really see the point of her making it up entirely. So I think it may be some combination of the few. I think Jessup did actually experience something down in the caves, and it's entirely possible her eyes played tricks on her or her mind played tricks on her. I think something did legitimately freak her out down there. And she briefly mentioned feeling something rub against her right before her candle went out, or her hand being on something fuzzy on the wall. So I think something did genuinely freak her out and cause her to back out of the cave. But another good reason to think she made this up is because the hypogeum is not even listed in the article that she talks about. It's not listed as the place where the children went missing. They were just missing in the caves under Malta. The hypogeum is there, but it's somewhere else, so that seems kind of like a misunderstanding that just sort of ended up going into her story wrong. And whether something did happen down there or did not, I really highly doubt that any of it has anything to do with the missing children at all, because it wasn't in the same place. It's not in the same place. And unless the skeletons of 30 school children and their instructors turn up in the caves one day, we're probably never going to have anything more to know about this than, either of these two stories. That's going to be all we have. Unless, of course, the bodies of the children are found. So that's it for this. It's just something that I found interesting, and I was not able to find really any information about on YouTube. It was briefly listed in a Wendigoon video, and I love Wendigoon, but he got the information slightly wrong. The picture he used was not from that location, and the story he had was a little bit off. So I looked into it more myself. This was all the information I could find on the internet that I brought here. Completely all of it. Like, there's not much on this, so this is about as far as you can get into it. These are the only good sources for that. So thank you for watching. This was quite fun for me, but this is the 7th time I've tried recording this because it's very hard to talk to yourself. Apparently, I underestimated that, but I really appreciate you watching. So thank you.